think everyone knows Allison Armour-Garb, who is one of the primary authors of the New York State Education Department's application for CGSA in the last round. And we thought a good process for today would be to have a conversation with Allison, just to get her pick her brain as to what it was like to write the grant. And so she's graciously agreed to speak with us today and to give her thoughts on this. So we do have a series of questions, and I'll start with that. Allison, if you're ready.
Ready. Thank you, Paul. And also I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Nicole Lennon, who was also in the meeting, who was equally involved in writing our proposal and developing our application. So she's here too to keep me honest.
Very good. Very good. I think she was the first person to contact me about your interest in writing, and I thought you came up with a fabulous proposal, and apparently U.S. Department of Ed thought so too. So, so the first question is, at what stage were you in developing what you call the plan pilot, as articulated in your grant, when the RFP first came out?
We had been working on the concept for about a year because we had applied for some foundation funding, some seed money, a year earlier. And that was, we had won that grant and then hired, we weren't very far in, I think this was going to be the next question you're going to ask me. How had we already begun implementing? So we had only gotten a little ways in terms of implementing by the time the CGSA grant came out. We had hired, we had started assembling our team, hired a project manager. I'd gotten Nicole on board too. And we had been connecting with partners, outside partners, and we had begun the work of launching an advisory process, and we had also started talking to internal staff to think about regulatory issues implicated by the pilot. So just to summarize, we had been working on the concept for quite a while, but we were not very far with any type of implementation.
Yeah, and I guess my takeaway from that, Allison, is rather than coming up with a whole new idea, you folks really focused on something you believed was important and had already started working on, and even brought in other investments, and so built from there, right? And so that
Yes.
might be a takeaway for others to think about.
Yes, and in fact, when we applied for the Carnegie Fund, we knew that that was not going to be enough to do the project that we proposed to Carnegie. They were only providing funding that we could use for a couple of years. We knew this was going to be a much longer timeline to implement. And so there are measures of success with Carnegie included finding additional funding to build out and sustain the work. So when this announcement came out, we were very excited and jumped right on it. We thought this is what we've been looking for.
Fabulous, fabulous. So you started to talk about your order of processes that you employed in putting your grant together, who would be involved, what kind of theory of action you might have started with, perhaps some permissions as to being able to move forward. New York is a fairly complex state in terms of permission for big new projects. What kinds of technical assistance supports might you need, field inputs, all of that. How did you think about that order of processes as you started to organize yourself?
Well, I took your question to mean specifically regarding putting together the CGSA application, if that's right. Okay. So yeah, as I said, the first thing that happened was we had started developing the theory of action quite a long ways in advance. And that grew out of some other work that's happening in New York in terms of re-looking at high school graduation requirements. And there had been some stakeholder input saying, we need different kinds of assessments. So that's where this whole idea came from in the first place. Then, of course, we did have to get permission to develop the application and figure out if Nicole and I could more or less drop everything else we were doing to focus on it, because we had, another timeline sort of in progress, but no other people that we could spare. Then we immediately wanted to hire a grant writing consultant, which is not easy to do. We don't have normally any budget for that, but luckily with the original seed money grant, we did have a little money that we were allowed to use for hiring a consultant. Then the next step is called the concept paper. So we really like to start with a short document that explains what the concept would be for the proposal, and it tries to match the parameters of the RFP. And that's to make sure that we are all on the same page, that we're writing something that's responsive, and also it gives us something to circulate for feedback. So while we were doing that, we were also trying to pull together names of potential external peer reviewers. Friendly criticisms are very helpful when you're developing something like this. And it's not like we, pulled together a whole list and then we're like, okay, go find them. It was like each time we talked to some expert, they would suggest another one. And so we were gathering those names on a rolling basis. And if we had their name early on, we circulated the concept paper to them. If we didn't get their name till later, maybe they only got a full draft. We were having internal folks review the materials as well. So circulating the concept paper internally. As we were going with the feedback we were getting and deeper conversations with our consultant, who was sort of new to all of this, we were building out the theory of action and writing the draft narrative. So that was all kind of, happening iteratively, and working with an external person like that, I think, it brought in additional expertise as well as, helped us push our thinking.
Great. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds to me like really there were three folks writing the grant. Yourself and Dr. Lennon, and then also this contracted grant writer, but that you also sought feedback from a number of folks externally and internally. That's how you did it. You didn't have a big writing team. Am I right?
Right. Yeah, so there were a couple other people involved. We had our brand new project manager internally was involved. But not as deeply. And also our external consultant had a staff, and I'm not sure 100% how she deploys them. So, but she was the person we were interfacing with, and then maybe her team had different expertise that, that they were helping her with stuff. Maybe they were doing research, maybe they were drafting a budget, maybe, I don't know. That was a little bit of a black box for me.
Yeah. Oh, great. So let's dig into the theory of action. As you know, this group has two work groups, one of which is theory of action in design, and the other is quality and consistency of implementation. So let's talk a little bit about theory of action. How did you establish your theory of action? You said you had worked on it prior to CGSA, but then brought it forward. So how did you establish it? And maybe you could just speak to it generally speaking, give us a sense as to what it is.
Sure. So as Kirsten alluded, our proposal was not about the state assessments, rebuilding state assessments per se. It was about sort of looking at models that were already successfully operating in New York that relied on what we call performance-based assessment, and trying to learn from them and seeing whether what they were already doing could be done in other places in diverse parts of the state, and what supports would be needed to enable other schools and educators to be able to implement those kinds of approaches. And so our original grant from Carnegie was just sort of putting together a pilot where we would pick about 30 schools that were not already implementing performance assessments and have them learn from these existing entities and schools that are already doing that, and study what it took to shift them. And what we built out for the CGSA grant was actually to figure out how to move from what we learned from the pilot to a broader system change. So that was not really clearly figured out in the original grant. The other big change that was made for the federal grant was to focus much more explicitly on instructional shifts, not only on changes in what the assessments were themselves. And so our consultant was quite familiar with implementation science. I don't know if that was a pre-existing, set of knowledge that she had, or if that was research that she did in support of our work. But so the theory of action is designed around implementation science.
Fabulous, fabulous. And did since the grant was awarded, have you been modifying your theory of action subsequently as you started to build out the work?
I don't really think we're changing it a lot since we put together the CGSA application. I think the concept is somewhat different from the original Carnegie grant in that it has that explicit focus on instruction. And also one of the things I think we learned from you and from other people we consulted with was the importance of sort of using community of practice type approaches, and also kind of thinking about not just replicating, but adapting existing approaches to build buy-in and sustainability in scaling.
Okay, great. And did you customize the theory of action at all based on New York's fairly diverse and unique history of assessment and accountability expectations? We all know, of course, that New York is the home of the Regents examination for graduation, and certainly what's going on in New York City and what's going on with BOCES. Lots of different approaches are being taken across the Empire State. How did you take that into consideration in your theory of action?
So I guess what I would say is that not only are we one of a relatively small number of states that still uses end of course exams as a mandatory condition for high school graduation, and not just one or two, but like a whole set of 5 of them. Those assessments also kind of grew in terms of the stakes attached to them during the Race to the Top era. And I think that conversations about the purposes and uses of assessments kind of got confused, or people really became very confused about how you figure out what a test is used for and how that affects how it should be designed, or vice versa, like how do you design it to match the purpose. And I think also, when we looked at that CGSA application and it was talking about the importance of assessment literacy, like that really rang true, because I think what we were seeing in New York was a lot of emphasis on kind of test prep approaches, because people were worried about the stakes on educators that were attached to the tests, for their professional reviews. So part of what we're looking at is how to rebuild that literacy among educators in terms of why do you use different types of assessments and how can you use them to strengthen your instruction. Also, we're a state with a very strong tradition of local control. So I think that's part of why this idea of using communities of practice and encouraging looking at models that are functioning in our state, but also adapting them, seemed like a good approach.
Great, great. So let's move on now and talk about how did you enlist folks? Because one of the things that I'm sure the U.S. Department of Ed likes to see is with an application that it's not something that just got cooked up in the Capitol, but that there are folks signed on and already engaged in it. Now, you already had started, so you did have that to go on. But how did you bring New York educators and schools and districts in to participate in the project and sign on to the grant application if you chose to do that?
We did include letters of support with our application. We didn't actually, I don't think, have any districts in signing letters, as I recall. We had what we are referring to as our model partners that had been introduced to us, some of them by the Carnegie folks, and some of them, we had tracked down, like, for example, well, yeah, through our own connections. But so we had folks from those model partner organizations and then we have a regular process of stakeholder engagement at the department where different associations like the unions and the superintendent's association and things like that meet regularly with department leadership. And so we just put onto the agendas for those meetings, we're seeking your support for this project and explaining what the project was. We would have a package, like a sample letter, that short concept paper that I described, and circulate that to people. And so we asked more people for letters than we actually got, but we did get a pretty great set of letters, I think.
It does seem like that concept paper served you in multiple ways going forward, right?
Yeah. So I'm giving away a trade secret there.
Great. And so let's talk a little bit about quality and consistency. How did you initially address quality and consistency of both delivery and implementation at the local level, knowing that, you're trying to affect what goes on in classrooms and in schools, right? How did you do that, and how are you doing it now?
So actually, we're not there yet. So this pilot has not started. But that is a question that we've given a lot of thought to. And as I say, we've kind of been evolving our thinking away from this idea of strict replication, which I think many of our model partners would prefer. Like, they like their model. They're very happy with their model. And when they let new schools in, they do try to replicate, and they have their own processes for that. But I think we are thinking more in terms of an adaptation approach, and we've used a big chunk of the CGSA funding we put out through an RFP, and we are contracting with entities to run technical assistance centers to support the pilot schools. So I think part of what they will be doing is trying to focus on certain key practices with the educators who they're providing professional learning supports and services to ensure that those educators are learning how to work to a high degree of quality. The other thing I will say on that, which wasn't on my notes, but I really want to do a shout out to the paper that the Learning Policy Institute put out on, I forget what it's called, but it's basically features of high quality systems of performance assessment. And Nisha is one of the co-authors, and the name of the main first author is escaping me at the moment. But I think we've been holding that up in many forums, talking to our advisors about it. Thank you. And referring to it in our pilot school application process and things like that. And so that's what we believe is like the state of the art in terms of understanding what constitutes quality in this realm that we're operating in.
Right. And just to be clear, what you're trying to do is build capacity with multiple measures. You're not
Yeah.
looking to have comparability across the state through a state assessment system. That's not your intent here, right?
Right. I mean, I think we feel that our state assessment system is, has to hold to those high standards of comparability because of the purposes for which those assessments are used. And we're focusing more on improving instruction in the classroom, and having assessments that support the educator's ability to give feedback to the students on their learning. So yeah, comparability is not the uppermost concern, although if, stakes beyond classroom grades are to be attached to any of these assessments, that is an important thing to think about in terms of equity. And even if it's just used for classroom purposes, like you want to make sure that the assessments are giving students equitable, if not identical, learning opportunities. Like if it's student driven in terms of what they're pursuing, you don't want to have greatly varying standards in terms of what the students are expected to do.
A lot to balance there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing this, Allison. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and the work that you've done. Really, really do appreciate it.